The price of a dream wedding when love and money collide. Jason had always thought of himself as someone who lived simply. He wasn't materialistic, nor did he crave anything extravagant. All he ever wanted was to be with Claire, the woman he loved, and build a future together. They had been through 3 years of highs and lows, but through it all, their bond only seemed to grow stronger. The proposal had been perfect, romantic, intimate, and heartfelt. It felt like they were on the path to a beautiful life ahead. But when it came time to plan their wedding, Jason began to see a side of Claire he had never noticed before. Claire had always talked about a fairy tale wedding, and like many brides, she dreamed of the perfect day. Jason, however, thought it was just the usual Pinterest-inspired fantasy, a charming venue, a delicious meal, and a gathering of their closest friends and family. He imagined something modest, beautiful, and filled with love. But as Claire began presenting ideas for the wedding, grand venues, designer gowns, lavish catering, it became clear that her vision wasn't what Jason had imagined. It wasn't just a nice wedding. It was a lavish spectacle. One afternoon, as they toured a stunning luxury estate, Claire's eyes sparkled. She had fallen in love with the venue that cost $30,000 just to reserve. Jason's heart dropped. The price tag on this dream wedding was beginning to feel more like a financial burden. Each conversation about the wedding seemed to escalate, with Claire adding more ideas to the list: bigger dresses, more expensive caterers, live bands, and Jason's concern deepened. It wasn't just a wedding anymore. It was quickly becoming a financial nightmare. Then Claire suggested the unthinkable. "Why don't we just take out a loan?" she asked casually, as if it was the most obvious solution. Jason's stomach sank. A loan for a wedding. His dream of a future together now seemed threatened by the weight of an expensive, single day. What had once been a celebration of love was now feeling more like a financial trap. Jason tried to stay calm as he sat down with Claire that evening, the weight of the situation heavy on his shoulders. He knew they had to talk, but he wasn't sure how to bridge the gap between his dream of a future together and her dream of a perfect, extravagant wedding. "Look, Claire," he started gently, "I love you, but we need to be realistic here. This wedding it's becoming way more expensive than we can afford. We can still have an amazing day without taking on a huge loan." Claire's face tightened, her eyes flashing with frustration. "What are you saying?" she asked, her voice rising. "Are you telling me that you don't want to give me the wedding I've always dreamed of?" Jason's heart sank. He had always known that Claire wanted the fairy tale wedding, but he never imagined it would come to this. "I want you to be happy, Claire," he said softly, trying to keep his voice steady. "But we're talking about a $70,000 loan. That's a massive amount of debt for one day. I don't think it's worth it." Her expression hardened, her jaw tightening as she crossed her arms. "This is my dream wedding, Jason," she said, her voice trembling now, not with doubt but with raw emotion. "I've imagined this day since I was a little girl. Don't you want me to be happy? Don't you care enough to make this day special for me?" Jason felt a pang of guilt twist in his chest. Of course, he wanted her to be happy. Of course, he wanted to make this day everything she dreamed of. But there had to be a limit. He had to protect their future, not just their wedding day. "I do care, Claire," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "But I also care about our future. We can still have a beautiful wedding. We just don't need to spend a fortune to do it." Claire's eyes filled with frustration. She stood up abruptly, her tone turning bitter. "Why should I settle for something less just because you're being cheap? This is my day. Why can't you just make it happen?" Jason froze. He wasn't sure when the conversation had shifted from compromise to confrontation. The woman he loved, the woman he was planning to marry, was suddenly someone he barely recognized. It wasn't just about the wedding anymore. It was about control. About her getting what she wanted, no matter the cost. "I'm not being cheap, Claire," he said, trying to keep his voice even. "I'm being responsible. This isn't just about one day. It's about us. Our life together. We can have the wedding you want, but we can't destroy our future for it." But Claire wasn't listening anymore. Her frustration erupted. "You just don't get it, do you?" she snapped. "You promised me a dream wedding, and now you're backing out. Why do you have to ruin everything?" Jason's chest tightened. He couldn't understand why Claire, who had always been so thoughtful and loving, was acting like this. The more he tried to make her see his point of view, the more her anger seemed to rise. And the more it became clear this wasn't about a wedding. It was about winning. The tension between Jason and Claire reached a breaking point, but it wasn't just the two of them anymore. After their heated argument, Claire grew distant. She stopped talking about the wedding, and for a while, Jason thought maybe she just needed space. He hoped that time would help her cool off, that she'd come around to seeing reason. But instead of the peace he'd expected, things only got worse. It started with little things. His mother seemed to be avoiding his calls, and when she did answer, her tone was off, distant. It was subtle at first, but it was enough for Jason to notice. He tried to brush it off, thinking it was just stress, but then his sister started acting the same way. She didn't return his texts, and when he managed to catch her on the phone, there was a coldness in her voice that unsettled him. "Hey, sis, what's going on?" Jason asked, trying to sound casual, though his heart was beginning to race. "You're acting weird. Everything okay?" There was a long pause on the other end, then his sister's voice, thick with disappointment, came through. "I can't believe you're being so selfish, Jason." "Selfish?" Jason repeated, his confusion turning into frustration. "What are you talking about?" "You promised Claire the wedding of her dreams," his sister continued, her words cutting through the phone. "And now you're backing out. How could you do that to her? You're breaking her heart." Jason's stomach churned. He was stunned into silence. Selfish? He had never promised Claire anything like that. He had been upfront from the beginning about his concerns over the finances, about the reality of their situation. How could his own family be so quick to take Claire's side? "I've always been clear about the money, okay? I never said I'd give her whatever she wanted," Jason said, trying to keep his voice calm. "I love her, but I won't go into debt for a wedding. That's not something I can do." But his sister wasn't listening. "You're being unreasonable, Jason," she said, her voice sharp. "You've got a chance to make her happy, and you're choosing money over her happiness. It's not right." Jason's mind was racing. He couldn't believe this. "This wasn't the woman I thought I knew," he thought. "And now my family is turning on me, too." His sister hung up, leaving him standing there, his phone in his hand, feeling more alone than ever. Claire had painted him as the villain. She had made him out to be the one denying her happiness, the one who didn't care enough to give her the wedding she had dreamed about. And now his own family was siding with her. Jason's heart pounded. He had always tried to do what was right, but now it seemed like everyone was against him. Claire's words echoed in his head, twisting the truth. "You promised me. You don't care about me. You're ruining everything." It felt like he was fighting a battle on all fronts, against Claire, against his family, and against his own doubts about the person he thought he knew so well. The guilt he had been feeling for not giving in to Claire's demands now morphed into a deeper, more unsettling feeling. This wasn't just about money anymore. It was about manipulation. It was about being pushed into a corner, being forced to make a choice that wasn't his own. The worst part? Jason was starting to realize just how deeply Claire had orchestrated all of this. She had been telling his family a version of the story that painted him as the bad guy, the one who couldn't make her happy. And now his mother was calling him too, adding to the pressure. "Jason." His mother's voice came over the phone, sharp with concern. "What's going on with you two? Claire's been in tears, and I can't believe you're letting this wedding fall apart like this." "I'm not letting anything fall apart," Jason said, frustration bubbling up. "I'm trying to make her see reason. I love her, but this wedding, it's out of control. I can't keep up with this. We can't just go into debt for one day, Mom." "You don't understand," his mother said, her voice trembling with emotion. "This is supposed to be the happiest day of her life. Don't you want her to be happy, Jason?" Jason slammed his fist against the arm of the chair, the weight of the situation crashing down on him. How did everything get so messed up? He thought. I've always tried to do the right thing, and now I'm the one being crucified for it? His mother's words hung in the air, haunting him. This is supposed to be the happiest day of her life. Was it really worth sacrificing their future for a single day? Was that what love meant? Was that what marriage meant? Jason couldn't keep going down this path. Something had to change, but he didn't know what that was anymore. Every conversation with Claire, every moment with his family, only made him feel more trapped. The more he tried to make sense of it all, the more everything started to feel wrong. And in the back of his mind, a nagging thought began to creep in. What if this wasn't about love anymore? What if it was about control? At that moment, Jason realized that this wasn't just about a wedding. It was about a much bigger issue, one that went to the core of his relationship with Claire. The manipulation, the pressure, the guilt, it was all piling up. And for the first time, Jason wasn't sure he could keep ignoring it. The atmosphere in the apartment felt suffocating, thick with unspoken words and tension that had been building for days. Jason had hoped that things would cool down, that Claire would come to her senses, but instead, everything had only grown worse. One evening, Claire sat him down in the living room, her expression unreadable. Jason braced himself, sensing something serious was coming. "I can't keep doing this, Jason," she said, her voice cold and calculated. "If you won't take out the loan for the wedding, then maybe we shouldn't be together." Jason's stomach dropped. The room seemed to shrink around him as her words hit like a blow to the chest. A loan for the wedding or the relationship was over. How had it come to this? He stared at her, trying to process what she had just said. "Claire, this isn't about me not wanting to give you what you want. This is about us, our future," he said, his voice shaky but firm. "I can't go into debt like that for a single day. We can't afford it. I won't let this wedding put our whole life at risk." She didn't respond right away. Her eyes narrowed, a flicker of something in them. Anger? Disappointment? But she was silent, as if she had already made her mind up. "You don't understand, Jason," she said finally, her voice trembling, but with an edge of finality. "I've been dreaming about this day my entire life, and if you're not willing to do this for me, then maybe we don't have a future together." Jason's heart was racing. He had known this moment was coming, but nothing could prepare him for how it felt to hear the woman he loved threaten the future they had built. 3 years together, and now she was willing to throw it all away over a wedding. The weight of her words crushed him. He wasn't sure what was worse, the fact that she was willing to do this or the realization that she might actually mean it. He tried to keep his voice steady, despite the storm of emotions crashing inside him. "I'm not saying we can't have a beautiful wedding, Claire," he said, the words coming out slow, deliberate. "I just don't want us to sacrifice everything for one day. I'm thinking about our life after the wedding, not just the day itself." She shook her head, eyes welling up with tears, but the frustration was still there, burning. "This is my dream, Jason. You promised me. I thought you loved me enough to make it happen. But now you're just being selfish." The word selfish hit him like a physical blow. The guilt that had been gnawing at him for days swelled into something darker, heavier. Was I being selfish? He wondered. Am I ruining everything? "I need time to think," Jason said, his voice barely above a whisper. He didn't want to lose her, but the decision was tearing him apart. She didn't respond, just turned away, a wall of silence rising between them. The absence of her words felt more deafening than any argument they had had. For days, Claire refused to speak to him. She didn't bring up the wedding, didn't ask how he was feeling. The silence was suffocating. Jason spent those days lost in thought, wrestling with the impossible choice she had given him. Every time he tried to focus on the future they had planned together, the pressure from Claire, and now from his family, drowned him. His mother began calling daily, her voice tinged with frustration and worry. "I don't understand why you're being so stubborn, Jason," she said, her words cutting through the quiet of his apartment. "Claire is devastated. You've hurt her, and now she's questioning everything. Don't you want her to be happy?" He could feel his resolve beginning to waver. "Don't you want her to be happy?" His mother's words echoed in his mind, haunting him. Of course, he wanted Claire to be happy. But at what cost? His sister, too, was quick to weigh in. "Why are you being so difficult, Jason? This is supposed to be the happiest day of her life. You're being selfish. Don't you care about her dreams?" The guilt was unbearable. Jason found himself questioning everything, his choices, his love for Claire, even his relationship with his family. Was he really being unreasonable? Was this what love was supposed to feel like, being pushed into a corner, having no way out? But the deeper he looked, the more confused he became. The guilt and pressure were mounting, but so was the feeling that something was deeply wrong. Was this how it was supposed to be? Was love really about giving up everything for someone else's dream, even if it meant compromising your own values, your future? Jason sat in silence, staring at his phone as his mother's voicemail chimed in once again. Her message was filled with concern, but beneath that there was an unmistakable sense of guilt-tripping. "You need to make a decision, Jason," she urged, her voice trembling. "Claire is hurting, and this is all your fault." Each call, each message only made him feel more isolated. He was starting to wonder if his family even understood him anymore. Everyone seemed to be on Claire's side, putting the pressure on him to cave. And every day that passed, Jason felt like he was sinking deeper into a hole he couldn't climb out of. The question gnawed at him relentlessly: was he being selfish? Or was he simply trying to protect the future they had worked so hard to build? The more he thought about it, the more it became clear. The ultimatum Claire had given him wasn't just about the wedding. It was about control. And if he gave in, if he took out that loan, it would be the first of many compromises he would make in a relationship that was beginning to feel less and less like love and more like a negotiation. Jason knew he had to make a choice. But the longer he waited, the more he realized no matter what decision he made, someone was going to lose. It was late when Jason finally returned home after another exhausting day at work. The apartment was quiet, the only sound the faint hum of the refrigerator. He walked through the door and immediately noticed the soft glow of Claire's laptop screen on the dining table. She wasn't around, she was already asleep, her absence in the living room almost a relief after the tension between them over the past few days. But something in him stirred, an unsettling feeling that made him pause. Jason wasn't the type to snoop. He had always respected Claire's privacy, never wanting to invade her space. But tonight was different. Tonight, there was a gnawing feeling in his chest that wouldn't let go, a growing suspicion that something wasn't right. Against his better judgment, he sat down at the table and opened the laptop. The cursor hovered for a moment before clicking into her messages. At first, the conversation appeared innocent enough, just casual chats with her friends. But as Jason scrolled down, his heart began to race. The messages became increasingly alarming, each word digging deeper into the pit in his stomach. There, in black and white, was Claire's conversation with her best friend. "He'll cave in," Claire had written, followed by a laughing emoji. "He's so easy to manipulate." Jason's blood ran cold. Manipulate? The words echoed in his mind as he read on, his hands trembling as he scrolled further. It was worse than he could have imagined. Claire had been talking to her ex for months. They'd reconnected, sharing intimate details of her life and even discussing their past relationship. Jason's stomach twisted into knots as he read through the messages, realizing that while he was struggling to make a decision, Claire had already made hers. But what came next shattered him completely. Claire had asked her ex to open a joint account with her, a secret account, away from Jason's knowledge. She'd been saving money in it, setting aside a backup plan in case things with Jason didn't work out. She'd been preparing for an escape all along. The lavish wedding, the push for the loan, it wasn't about love. It wasn't about a life together. It was a financial strategy, a way for Claire to secure her future, with or without Jason. Jason's mind reeled as he stared at the screen. The world around him seemed to blur. This wasn't just about a wedding. It was about something far darker. Claire had been using him, manipulating him to fund her dream, to set herself up for a comfortable exit when the time was right. She had been planning an escape, keeping him as a fallback, as a means to an end. The betrayal cut deeper than anything Jason had ever felt. The woman he had loved, the woman he had thought he would spend his life with, had been deceiving him. She wasn't interested in their future. She had been playing a game all along, one that he didn't even know he was part of. Jason's breath came in shallow gasps as the weight of the realization crashed over him. He closed the laptop with shaking hands, but the images of the messages, the proof of her betrayal, wouldn't leave his mind. For the first time, he felt the full extent of her manipulation. She had been testing him, playing him, pretending to love him while keeping her options open with her ex. This wasn't a woman he could trust. This wasn't the person he thought she was. All those promises, all those moments of love, they had been lies. Claire wasn't dreaming of a future with him. She was simply securing her financial future, making sure she was taken care of no matter what. Everything had changed in an instant. The woman he had loved, the woman he thought would stand by his side, had turned into someone unrecognizable. The truth had finally come to light, and Jason knew that there was no going back. The pain was sharp, but there was something else bubbling beneath it. Anger, disappointment, a sense of clarity. This was the moment everything changed. The moment Jason understood that his future with Claire had never been real. And now, with the truth exposed, Jason knew what he had to do next. But the question was no longer about the wedding. It was about finding a way out of the web Claire had carefully spun around him. Jason stood in the dimly lit living room, the weight of the evidence heavy in his hands. The messages, the bank statements, the joint account with her ex. His heart still ached, but his resolve had never been clearer. He had been manipulated for so long, but no more. It was time to confront Claire. He found her sitting at the kitchen table, her face unreadable. She had been avoiding him for days, but now, with everything in front of him, Jason knew there was no more running from the truth. "Claire," he started, his voice calm but firm. "We need to talk." Claire looked up, her expression defensive, but she didn't say a word. Jason took a deep breath and laid everything out in front of her. The messages with her ex, the joint account, the money she'd been secretly saving. "I know everything," he said, his voice steady despite the storm inside him. For a moment, Claire said nothing, her face pale as she processed what he was saying. Then, with a coldness that sent a shiver down his spine, she spoke. "So what? You went through my things? You invaded my privacy? If you don't trust me, maybe we shouldn't be together." Her words stung, but Jason stood his ground. He could feel the walls he had once believed in, those of love, trust, and partnership, crumbling before him. The woman he had thought he was building a life with was gone, replaced by someone who didn't care about honesty, about respect, about love. This wasn't the person he had fallen in love with. This was someone manipulative, deceitful, and selfish. "I don't need to trust you anymore," Jason said, his voice barely above a whisper, yet strong enough to carry the weight of his heartbreak. "You've already shown me who you really are, and I won't let you destroy everything I've worked for, everything I believe in, just for your convenience." The silence that followed was suffocating. Claire, her eyes full of anger and fear, stood up, gathered her things, and walked toward the door without saying another word. "I need space," she muttered, her voice shaky, and with that she was gone. Jason felt the finality of it all in his chest. His world, which had once seemed so sure, was now shattered. He had loved her, he had trusted her, and now she was gone, leaving him with nothing but the broken remnants of a future he thought was solid. But even in the wreckage, Jason felt a sense of clarity slowly beginning to emerge. Days passed in a haze of confusion and grief. Jason spent countless hours replaying the events in his mind, questioning everything about the relationship. He felt lost, like he didn't even recognize himself anymore. But then, one afternoon, when he was alone with his thoughts, the universe threw him an unexpected lifeline. There was a knock at the door. Jason opened it, and to his surprise, standing in front of him was Claire's ex-boyfriend. His face was apologetic, almost nervous, but there was something genuine in his eyes. "I need to talk to you," he said, his voice low. Jason stepped back, allowing him inside. The man, whose name was Ben, sat down and took a deep breath before speaking. "I've been feeling guilty for a long time," Ben admitted. "Claire, she's been leading me on. I thought I could trust her, but the truth is, she was never serious about you. She was using you as a backup. She was planning to be with me, but she didn't want to risk losing her options. I've seen the messages. I didn't want to be part of it anymore." Jason sat in stunned silence as Ben pulled out his phone and showed him the messages that confirmed everything. It was as if the final pieces of the puzzle had snapped into place. He could finally see the whole picture, the web of lies and manipulation that Claire had carefully spun. For the first time in days, Jason felt a flicker of something, relief. With the truth finally out, Jason knew he had to take control of his life again. The following weeks were filled with difficult decisions, but one stood out above the rest. He contacted a lawyer. He wasn't going to let Claire play the victim, not after everything she had done. And when the case went to court, Claire's lies unraveled in front of everyone. The judge dismissed her claims, and Claire's narrative of being wronged by Jason fell apart. Her manipulation, her deceit. It all came out, and she was left with nothing but the consequences of her actions. It wasn't easy, though. Even after the legal victory, Jason's family remained divided. His mother, always the one to encourage him to make peace, refused to see things from his perspective. She still blamed him for the collapse of his relationship. But his sister, after seeing the truth for herself, came to Jason with tears in her eyes, apologizing for ever siding with Claire. "I didn't see it," she said quietly, "but now I understand. I'm sorry." And with that, Jason realized that sometimes you don't get to choose who believes in you. What mattered now was his own belief in himself. As the months went by, Jason began to rebuild. He reconnected with old friends, rediscovered parts of himself that had been lost in the chaos of his relationship with Claire. The pain of the breakup slowly transformed into something else, a quiet strength, a hard-earned wisdom that came from letting go of what no longer served him. And just when he thought love had betrayed him for good, a small flicker of hope reappeared. It wasn't romantic, not yet, but a friend from college reached out. She had heard about his breakup and, through casual conversation, reminded him of the value of trust, of friendship, and of being truly seen. It wasn't the love he thought he was looking for, but it felt good to have someone in his corner, someone who supported him, not because of what he could give, but because of who he was. The final lesson Jason learned was simple, though profound. Sometimes the hardest part of walking away is realizing that what you thought was love was just a lesson in disguise. He had loved Claire with everything he had, but now he was learning to love himself again. And in that love, in that rediscovery of who he was, Jason knew that he was stronger than he had ever been before. The future was no longer uncertain, it was his to shape,